It started as a quiet Sunday at the Brentwood estate, a sprawling $13.5 million property that had been home to Hollywood legend Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle for decades. The morning sun filtered through the trees, birds chirped, and the world outside went about its business, blissfully unaware that behind the gates, a nightmare was about to unfold. By the end of the day, the world would be confronted with a tragedy so shocking, so incomprehensible, that it would dominate headlines and social media feeds alike. How could a family so seemingly perfect, so privileged, fall victim to a horror of this magnitude? The answer, as chilling as it is tragic, lies within the walls of that estate. A story of betrayal, violence, and a darkness that no one saw coming. Rob Reiner, now 78, had spent a lifetime in the public eye. The actor, director, producer, and activist was a figure known for both his contributions to Hollywood and his unfiltered voice on social and political issues. Michelle, 70, stood beside him as a partner and confidant, a private presence in a life often lived under the scrutiny of the world. Their home, immaculate and serene in appearance, had been a sanctuary. Yet sanctuaries, no matter how grand, can conceal the most devastating secrets. On that fateful day, December 14, 2025, the very place meant to protect and nurture became the scene of unimaginable horror. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The bodies of Rob and Michelle were discovered by their daughter Romy, 27, whose life would be forever altered in an instant. She reportedly found them after entering the home and witnessing the unimaginable. In a moment that would haunt her for years, she also relayed a cryptic warning to authorities, a warning about a dangerous family member who should be a suspect. Who could she have met? And why had she felt the need to signal the police before they could discover the crime themselves? These questions would become central to a story that seemed ripped from a true crime thriller rather than the quiet, curated lives of a Hollywood family. Inside the estate's guest house, Nick Reiner, 32, the son of Rob and Michelle, had been living. In the hours following the discovery of his parents' bodies, Nick was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The details surrounding the deaths of Rob and Michelle were already disturbing, but the narrative would only darken further. Reports soon revealed that Nick himself had died in prison under circumstances described as multiple sharp force injuries, with the manner of death officially ruled as homicide. In the space of a single week, the Reiner family endured a loss beyond comprehension. First, the shocking death of the patriarch and matriarch, then the violent death of their son behind bars. The story raises immediate, haunting questions. What drove Nick to such actions? Was this an isolated outburst, a premeditated act, or a symptom of something far deeper? And how could a family so publicly esteemed, living in one of the most secure and affluent areas of Los Angeles, descend into such tragedy? Each answer leads to more questions, and the puzzle pieces, at first glance, seem impossible to fit together. But as the story unfolds, patterns emerge. Patterns that reveal betrayal, hidden tensions, and choices that culminated in a catastrophe no one could have anticipated. Public fascination with the Reiner family tragedy is not difficult to understand. Hollywood has long been a place where appearances mask hidden realities, where behind the glamour and accolades, personal dramas simmer in private. When tragedy strikes a high-profile family, the world watches, captivated by the intersection of fame and human vulnerability. The Reiners, known not only for their artistic contributions, but also for their carefully maintained public personas, became an instant focal point. Every detail, from the discovery of the bodies to the arrest, the charges, and the shocking death of Nick in prison, fueled speculation, analysis, and relentless media coverage. It is tempting to view this tragedy through the lens of celebrity sensationalism, but doing so risks missing the human depth of the story. Beyond the headlines are individuals grappling with unimaginable grief. Romy, the daughter who discovered her parents' bodies, had to navigate the aftermath while confronting the fact that her own brother was charged with the crime. Friends, neighbors, and extended family all had to process the inconceivable reality that a family once defined by stability and privilege was now fractured by violence and loss. For the world, the narrative is shocking. For those who lived it, it is an unfathomable nightmare. The timeline of events is equally chilling. According to reports, Rob and Michelle were found dead on the morning of December 14th. Details from law enforcement indicate the cause of death involved multiple sharp force injuries. While the circumstances remain under investigation, the official ruling of homicide underscores the deliberate, violent nature of the act. Later that night, Nick was taken into custody. The sequence of events raises urgent questions. Were there warning signs that were missed? Could intervention have prevented this? And what happened inside the prison walls that led to Nick's own untimely and violent death? Each layer of the story complicates the narrative, creating a web of intrigue, tragedy, and unanswered questions. The public response has been a mix of disbelief, horror, and morbid curiosity. Social media exploded with speculation, theories, and tributes to the Reiners' legacy. News outlets across the globe covered the story extensively, emphasizing both the shocking nature of the crimes and the human stories behind them. It is a phenomenon that is part fascination, part mourning, an intersection of celebrity culture and true crime that captures attention with a mix of empathy and intrigue. And yet, despite the saturation of media coverage, many questions remain unanswered, leaving the audience eager for clarity, context, and insight into the events that led to such devastating consequences. What makes this story particularly compelling is the interplay between private suffering and public perception. Rob Reiner, a figure whose career has touched generations, now faces a tragedy that not even fame, wealth, or influence could shield him from. Michelle's life, once devoted to family and partnership, ended in a violence that defies comprehension. And Nick, whose life was marked by both promise and struggle, found his story cut short in a prison environment that proved lethal. The confluence of these events presents a narrative rich in dramatic tension, human complexity, and unanswered questions. The audience is drawn in not only by the shock of the events, but by the deeper human truths they reveal. The fragility of life, the unpredictability of human behavior, and the sometimes dark consequences of unresolved tensions within a family. The Reiner family tragedy also underscores a broader societal fascination with crime, particularly within families of status and power. It challenges assumptions about safety, privilege, and morality. How could a family so seemingly perfect be torn apart in such a violent and public manner? What can be learned from the warning signs, the choices, and the circumstances that led to this tragedy? These questions are not just the province of true crime enthusiasts. They resonate on a universal level, prompting reflection on human behavior, familial relationships, and the sometimes hidden darkness within even the most outwardly stable households. And yet, for all the questions, one fact remains stark and undeniable. The Reiner family is forever changed. Rob and Michelle are gone, victims of a violence that no one could have predicted. Nick, who was supposed to inherit a legacy of privilege and opportunity, is also dead, a victim of circumstances that remain murky and fraught with complexity. Romy, now the surviving child, carries the burden of discovery, grief, and public attention. And the world watches, fascinated, horrified, and yearning for answers that may never come in full. This story is more than a tabloid headline or a Hollywood scandal. It is a deeply human tragedy, filled with emotional peaks and valleys, questions without answers, and consequences that ripple far beyond the immediate family. And as we peel back each layer, from the events of December 14th to the shocking developments in prison and the ongoing investigation, the narrative unfolds like a thriller, with twists, revelations, and cliffhangers at every turn. What was hidden behind the walls of the Brentwood estate is slowly coming into view, and the revelations yet to come will challenge assumptions, provoke shock, and demand reflection. By the end of this exploration, the audience will have walked through every facet of this tragedy. The fateful day, the investigation, the arrests, the family dynamics, the psychological factors, and the ongoing legal and personal fallout. Each chapter will build upon the last, providing context, insight, and drama, while never losing sight of the human toll at the center of the story. But what came next? Nick's death in prison, the unanswered questions, and the deeper mysteries of the family's private life would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The introduction closes with a lingering sense of anticipation and unease. The stage is set, the characters are defined, and the central mystery is clear. A family torn apart by violence, a son in custody, and a shocking death in prison. The audience is left wondering, how did it come to this? What drove the actions that shattered a family? And most importantly, what secrets still lie hidden, waiting to be revealed? This story is not just about tragedy. It is about human complexity, the fragility of relationships, and the unforeseen consequences of choices made behind closed doors. And as we move forward, the answers and the revelations promise to be as shocking as the tragedy itself. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday at the Brentwood estate. The kind of day that, in a household accustomed to wealth, fame, and routine, promised nothing more than quiet, comfort, and perhaps the faint hum of weekend leisure. But ordinary turned into extraordinary in the worst possible way. By the time the sun had fully risen, Rob Reiner and Michelle were dead. Their bodies had been found in their own home, victims of a violence so brutal it would leave the world stunned. The question that immediately gripped investigators, family, and the public alike was simple and terrifying. How did this happen? In a home that was supposed to be safe, in a family that seemed untouchable? The discovery of Rob and Michelle's bodies was made by their daughter, Romy, 27, a young woman who had grown up under the shadow of both Hollywood fame and the tight-knit, private dynamics of her family. Reports suggest she walked into the house that morning, expecting the familiar warmth of home, only to be confronted with a nightmare. It is said that she immediately noticed something was wrong, a subtle yet unmistakable sign, a disturbance in the air that sent a shiver down her spine. And then she saw them. The horror of that moment is nearly impossible to capture in words, but suffice it to say, it was a scene that would leave any human shaken to the core. Romy's reaction was immediate and telling. She did not panic. She did not flee. She contacted authorities and, perhaps most strikingly, offered a cryptic but chilling warning about a dangerous family member who should be a suspect. Those words would soon take on a weight and resonance that few could have anticipated. Who was she referring to? And what did she know that authorities did not? Meanwhile, inside the guest house on the same estate, Nick Reiner, 32, the son of Rob and Michelle, was living. It is unclear exactly what he was doing that day, but by nightfall, police had moved swiftly. Nick was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The swift transition from ordinary Sunday to arrest raises questions that continue to haunt this case. What preceded the violence? What triggered it? And what role, if any, did pre-existing tensions or psychological factors play? Law enforcement described the crime scene as both precise and shocking. The cause of death for Rob and Michelle was multiple sharp force injuries, a term clinical in its detachment, yet horrifying in its reality. Autopsy results would confirm that the deaths were homicides, ruling out accidents or external intruders. Every detail, from the type of weapon used to the manner in which the attack unfolded, became crucial in the investigation, providing a window, however grim, into the sequence of events that led to this tragedy. The public reaction was immediate. News outlets around the world covered the story with the mix of fascination and horror that true crime cases in celebrity families tend to generate. Social media exploded with speculation, with users debating motives, relationships, and possible psychological explanations. Yet for all the commentary, one fact stood out starkly. A family that had been admired for its prominence and perceived stability was now the epicenter of a story that defied comprehension. As the investigation unfolded, certain details began to emerge. Authorities were quick to note that there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victims knew the assailant and that the attack was not random. This point added a chilling layer to the narrative. When violence occurs inside the home, it is rarely random. The most shocking betrayals often come from those closest to us: family, friends, loved ones. And in this case, suspicion would inevitably focus on the very individuals who shared the household, and perhaps the hearts of the Reiners. The arrest of Nick Reiner cast an even darker shadow over the situation. Public understanding of him prior to this moment was limited. He had lived largely outside the media's gaze, a son of privilege but not a public figure in his own right. Yet within hours, he became the focal point of an investigation that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Speculation about his motives ranged from financial disputes to psychological instability, with experts weighing in on the possibility of deep-seated mental health issues. Was this an isolated act of rage, or was it part of a broader pattern that had remained hidden until now? The timeline of that Sunday begins to emerge in fragments. Investigators piece together the sequence of events through forensic evidence, witness statements, and the cryptic information provided by Romy. Each fragment, when considered individually, might have seemed mundane, but collectively, they painted a portrait of a day that began like any other and ended in the unthinkable. There were reports of movements within the house, sounds that neighbors might have dismissed as ordinary, and signs of a struggle that were only understood once the bodies were found. In hindsight, every detail becomes a potential clue, a thread that, when pulled, unravels the fabric of an entire family's life. Media coverage focused not only on the tragedy, but also on the environment in which it occurred. Brentwood, Los Angeles, is known for its affluence, its quiet streets, and its security. Homes are fortified, gates are high, and privacy is prized. Yet in spite of these measures, the Reiners were not insulated from the chaos that erupted within their own walls. This serves as a grim reminder that wealth and status do not shield families from the darkest aspects of human behavior. Violence can erupt anywhere, often where it is least expected, and the consequences can be devastating. Public fascination with true crime often centers on the interplay between the ordinary and the extraordinary. In this case, the ordinary, a Sunday morning in a family home, collided with the extraordinary, the brutal deaths of two individuals at the hands of someone known to them. This juxtaposition amplifies the horror, compelling the audience to wonder. What signs were there, if any, that could have foretold this outcome? Could anyone have intervened? And what does this tell us about the fragility of human relationships, even in families of wealth and prominence? The psychological dimensions of this tragedy are equally compelling. Family violence, particularly involving adult children, is a phenomenon that challenges conventional understanding. Experts have noted that such incidents often involve a confluence of factors: unresolved conflicts, mental health struggles, substance use, and complex family dynamics. While the Reiner case is unique in its specifics, it reflects broader truths about how tension, secrecy, and unresolved emotional issues can manifest in violent outcomes. As law enforcement continued to investigate, additional questions arose. Were there warning signs that friends, neighbors, or family members had missed? How had Nick's behavior in the days and weeks leading up to December 14th contributed to the tragedy? And what role did Romy's observations and warnings play in understanding the sequence of events? These questions would drive not only the investigation but also public speculation and analysis in the weeks that followed. The events of that night, and the aftermath, also highlight the role of the criminal justice system in cases involving high-profile individuals. Nick's arrest and subsequent detention raised questions about custody, the adequacy of protective measures, and the potential for further tragedy. It would later be revealed that Nick's life would end violently in prison, a development that added a layer of irony, horror, and unanswered questions to an already devastating narrative. The night of December 14th, 2025, thus represents the fulcrum of the Reiner family tragedy. It is a moment when ordinary life collided with extraordinary violence, setting off a chain of events that would consume investigators, media outlets, and the public alike. The details, as they emerge, reveal a story of complexity, betrayal, and the dark potential that lies within human relationships. For those seeking answers, the narrative offers both clarity and frustration, as every revelation seems to generate new questions, deeper mysteries, and unforeseen consequences. As we move forward into the investigation, the arrest, and the subsequent developments in prison, one thing becomes painfully clear. The story of December 14th is not just about crime. It is about family, trust, betrayal, and the unpredictable consequences of human emotion. It is about how a single day can change lives forever, how decisions made in private can ripple outward in devastating ways, and how even the most secure households can harbor secrets capable of erupting into tragedy. Fame, fortune, and a seemingly perfect life can mask even the darkest secrets. The Reiner family, known to the public for decades through Rob Reiner's legendary career and the quiet elegance of Michelle's presence beside him, appeared to be a Hollywood family that had it all. On the surface, they embodied success, stability, and charm. But as we peel back the layers, it becomes clear that appearances, as they often do, conceal deep fractures, simmering tensions, and a private world that no outsider could fully understand. Rob Reiner's life was, in many ways, a study in contrasts. A celebrated actor and filmmaker, he had crafted classics that touched generations, films that balanced humor, heart, and social commentary. Publicly, he was articulate, engaging, and occasionally outspoken on political issues, earning admiration and respect. At the heart of this story is the family dynamic, a complex web of relationships, expectations, and history. Romy, the youngest daughter, had grown up witnessing the successes and struggles of her parents, learning to navigate a household that was both public and intensely private. She was said to be close to both her parents, yet aware of undercurrents of tension, particularly regarding her brother Nick. Romy's role in the discovery of Rob and Michelle's bodies cannot be understated. She not only confronted a scene of unimaginable horror, but also had the presence of mind to alert authorities to the potential involvement of a family member. That warning would prove prophetic, and it underscores the subtle awareness she had of the underlying currents within the family. Nick Reiner, the son, presents a more complicated picture. Living in the guest house of his parents' estate, he occupied a liminal space, both part of the family and somewhat removed from the main household. Friends and acquaintances described him as private, occasionally troubled, and someone who had struggled with personal issues. Reports of behavioral red flags, though fragmentary, hint at tensions that may have existed beneath the surface. While he had access to the privileges afforded by his family's wealth, it appears that internal pressures, unresolved conflicts, and perhaps mental health challenges played a role in shaping his trajectory. Family dynamics, especially in high-profile households, are rarely straightforward. In the case of the Reiners, external perceptions suggested harmony and success, but insiders hint at friction points that had existed for years. The pressures of public scrutiny, combined with private grievances, created an environment where tensions could fester. Arguments over finances, personal choices, or the expectations of parents can seem minor to outsiders, yet within a household, they can carry profound emotional weight. The Reiner household was also shaped by its spatial arrangements, which may have amplified existing dynamics. Nick's residence in the guest house created both physical and symbolic separation. He was near, yet apart, part of the family, yet isolated. Such arrangements can foster independence, but they can also intensify feelings of alienation, resentment, or misunderstanding. Observers have noted that the guest house, while comfortable, may have served as a place where underlying frustrations quietly accumulated, ultimately contributing to the tragedy that unfolded on December 14th. Despite these tensions, the Reiners maintained a public facade of normalcy. Friends and colleagues often remarked on their civility, composure, and outwardly loving relationships. Yet even in families that appear functional, invisible pressures can mount. Disagreements left unresolved, emotional needs unmet, and behavioral red flags ignored can create an undercurrent of risk. In this sense, the tragedy of the Reiners is both unique and universally human, a reminder that even the most outwardly successful families can be vulnerable to sudden, catastrophic rupture. Psychological experts often emphasize the complexity of family relationships in high-stakes households. The combination of wealth, fame, and familial expectation can create a pressure cooker environment, particularly for children or adult offspring who struggle to define their identities. In the Reiner family, Nick's position within the household, coupled with any pre-existing struggles, may have contributed to a volatile situation. Romy's awareness of danger and her proactive reporting of a potential suspect indicate that the family was not immune to internal conflict, even if it had been largely invisible to outsiders. The interplay between visibility and privacy is also crucial to understanding this family. Rob and Michelle, while public figures cultivated private spaces and routines designed to maintain normalcy. Yet private. One particularly striking aspect of the Reiner family dynamic is the role of communication. Or, perhaps more accurately, the breakdown of communication. Romy's warning to authorities highlights her insight into family dynamics and her perception of risk. Yet it also raises questions. Why did it come to this? Were there earlier signs, conversations, or interventions that could have altered the course of events? Family psychologists often note that early intervention, open communication, and recognition of behavioral red flags can prevent escalation. In this case, the absence of such mechanisms, whether due to pride, denial, or circumstance, may have contributed to the catastrophic outcome. The relationships within the Reiner household also underscore a larger societal fascination with the private lives of public figures. There is a tension inherent in celebrity families, the desire to maintain normalcy, the need for privacy, and the inevitable public scrutiny that accompanies fame. In the Reiner's case, this tension may have intensified internal conflicts. The pressure to live up to external expectations, combined with personal struggles and family tensions, created a situation ripe for disaster. Even the seemingly mundane aspects of family life, disagreements over property, financial arrangements, or daily routines, take on heightened significance in this context. Small grievances can escalate when filtered through the lens of wealth, status, and public expectation. In high-profile families, these issues are rarely simple. They interact with identity, autonomy, and long-standing relational patterns, making resolution more difficult. The tragic events of December 14th reflect the culmination of these dynamics, with devastating consequences for everyone involved. The complexity of the Reiner family extends beyond internal relationships to include the broader network of friends, advisors, and associates. In wealthy, high-profile families, social networks can act as both support and pressure points. Well-meaning interventions may be ignored, advice can be disregarded, and external perceptions can influence internal decisions. In this case, it appears that outside perspectives may have been limited or perhaps filtered, leaving the family to navigate its tensions largely in isolation. The consequences of such isolation are evident in the tragic outcome. Finally, it is essential to acknowledge the emotional landscape of the Reiner household in the days, months, and years leading up to the tragedy. While the public sees the family in curated snapshots, red carpet events, interviews, and appearances, the private reality is often far more nuanced. Emotional volatility, subtle power dynamics, and the hidden weight of expectations can create a climate in which even small sparks can ignite major conflict. In this sense, the tragedy of December 14th was not entirely random. It was the eruption of pressures that had been building, unseen and unaddressed, for years. As we move forward into the story, the portrait of the Reiner family continues to deepen. We will explore Nick's life in greater detail, his relationships with each family member, and the factors that may have contributed to his actions. We will examine Romy's perspective, the parents' role, and the subtle but powerful dynamics that defined this household. Every revelation brings us closer to understanding how a family that appeared stable and privileged could descend into such unimaginable tragedy. But the story does not end with the household alone. What happened inside the guest house, the interactions that escalated to violence, and the aftermath of that fateful Sunday, including Nick's own untimely death in prison, are still to come. And as we delve into these chapters, one thing becomes clear. Even in families that seem perfect, the potential for tragedy lurks in the shadows, waiting for a moment to erupt. A moment that, in the Reiner's case, came all too suddenly and with devastating consequences. At the center of this tragedy is Nick Reiner, the son whose life, struggles, and ultimately violent death have become the focal point of both investigation and public fascination. To understand what happened on December 14th and the events that followed, it is essential to examine the life he led, a life that was, in many ways, defined by contradiction, privilege and isolation, opportunity and limitation, love and resentment. Every element played a role in shaping the man who would, in a matter of hours, be accused of a crime that shocked the world. Nick was 32 at the time of his arrest. The youngest son of Rob Reiner, a household name in Hollywood, and Michelle Reiner, a steadying presence beside him. Nick's upbringing was one of both comfort and expectation. From an early age, he was exposed to the privileges of a high-profile household, a sprawling Brentwood estate, access to elite education, and connections in the worlds of art, film, and culture. Yet alongside these privileges were pressures that often go unnoticed by outsiders. Being the child of a celebrity comes with an unspoken code: maintain appearances, uphold the family name, and meet expectations, explicit or implied, in every public and private sphere. For some, these pressures can be motivating. For others, they become a source of anxiety and frustration. For Nick, the pressure appears to have manifested in a series of personal challenges that would define much of his adult life. Friends and acquaintances have described Nick as intelligent, thoughtful, and at times quietly charismatic. But beneath that veneer, there were signs of volatility and struggle. Reports suggest he faced ongoing challenges with emotional regulation, social relationships, and perhaps mental health issues. Some sources hint at episodes of aggression, mood swings, or impulsive behavior that, while contained at times, foreshadowed the potential for crisis. In households like the Reiners, these traits can be both overlooked and amplified. Overlooked because the family wishes to maintain public harmony, and amplified because high-stakes, high-pressure environments leave little room for private struggles to be addressed constructively. The physical environment in which Nick lived also played a role. Residing in the guest house of the Brentwood estate, he had proximity to the family without being fully immersed in their daily routines. This arrangement offered independence, but also isolation. Such isolation can foster resentment or a sense of disconnect, particularly when combined with underlying personal challenges. Psychologists often note that individuals in these liminal spaces, neither fully integrated into the family unit nor entirely removed, can develop feelings of alienation, which in extreme circumstances may contribute to conflict. Nick's relationships with his parents were reportedly complex. Rob Reiner, the patriarch, is known for his strong personality, ambition, and drive. While these traits contributed to his success, they may have inadvertently placed pressure on his children to conform to certain expectations. Michelle, on the other hand, was described as nurturing yet firm, creating a household where love and discipline coexisted. Within this dynamic, Nick may have experienced both support and constraint. Love tempered by high expectations, freedom limited by the boundaries of a household accustomed to structure and prestige. Behavioral red flags are often overlooked in privileged households, especially when wealth and reputation can mask dysfunction. Nick's history reportedly included periods of emotional difficulty and conflict, though public documentation is limited. These patterns, when combined with the unique pressures of his family environment, may have contributed to the volatility that culminated in December 14th. The question that now haunts investigators, friends, and family alike is, could anyone have intervened before it was too late? One cannot discuss Nick's life without addressing the role of privacy and secrecy. In affluent households, especially those connected to Hollywood, appearances are meticulously curated. Behind the gates, however, the reality of daily life can be fraught with unspoken tensions, suppressed emotions, and interpersonal struggles. Nick's challenges were likely compounded by this dynamic: the need to appear stable and composed to the outside world, while grappling with inner turmoil that found no acceptable outlet. It is within this crucible that the events leading to the fatal confrontation unfolded. Friends and insiders describe Nick as someone who oscillated between charm and unpredictability. He could be engaging and empathetic in social contexts, yet withdrawn and volatile in private. These contradictions are not uncommon in individuals navigating personal challenges, but when they intersect with a household under the public eye, the stakes are elevated. The Reiner family's public persona may have inadvertently added pressure to Nick's personal struggles, creating an environment in which minor conflicts could escalate quickly into major crises. Mental health experts reviewing similar cases often point to the importance of early intervention and support networks. In Nick's case, the presence of wealth, opportunity, and familial resources may have masked underlying issues, delaying recognition or treatment. The irony is tragic. The very privileges that should have provided stability may have, in subtle ways, contributed to the isolation and volatility that ultimately played a role in the catastrophic events of December 14th. As we examine Nick's adult life, certain patterns emerge. Relationships with family members were fraught, but not absent of affection. He maintained connections with friends, though these were reportedly limited and subject to disruption by emotional volatility. His living situation in the guest house suggests a dual reality. He was both near the family and set apart from it, a physical manifestation of the emotional and psychological distance that may have defined his relationships. The fateful day itself, December 14th, did not occur in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of dynamic tension, personal struggle, and perhaps unmet needs. The question of motive, why Nick allegedly committed such a violent act against his parents, is central to understanding the tragedy. While law enforcement investigations and legal proceedings will ultimately provide official answers, psychological and contextual analysis offers insight into how complex human behavior, family dynamics, and environmental factors can converge in catastrophic ways. It is also important to consider the aftermath of Nick's life following the arrest. Within hours of the tragic events at the Brentwood estate, he was taken into custody, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The speed and severity of the legal response reflect both the gravity of the crime and the evidentiary support for suspicion. Yet this legal intervention did not mark the end of the tragedy. Rather, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in a story that would soon become even darker. Nick's life in custody, brief as it was, ended violently. Reports indicate that he was stabbed to death in prison, his cause of death described as multiple sharp force injuries, with the manner of death officially ruled a homicide. This unexpected and tragic development adds a layer of irony, horror, and unanswered questions to a narrative already steeped in grief and speculation. How could the son accused of murdering his parents himself become a victim of violence? What forces converged to create this outcome? And what does it reveal about the broader context of violence, retribution, and vulnerability within systems that are meant to protect individuals in custody? In examining Nick Reiner's life, one is struck by the interplay of potential and peril. He was a man shaped by privilege yet constrained by circumstance, capable of warmth yet vulnerable to volatility, loved yet isolated. These contradictions are central to understanding not only his alleged actions, but also the profound tragedy that enveloped his entire family. It is a story that underscores the complexity of human behavior, the fragility of family relationships, and the sometimes devastating consequences of unaddressed personal struggle. As we move forward into the events of December 14th and the legal, social, and emotional aftermath, Nick Reiner's life serves as both the lens and the catalyst. His struggles, relationships, and choices provide essential context for understanding the cascade of events that transformed a Sunday morning at the Brentwood estate into a scene of horror and a headline-grabbing tragedy. And yet, for all we know, the full scope of what led to that day, the triggers, the tensions, and the internal battles, may never be fully revealed, leaving the story shrouded in both fact and speculation. December 14th, 2025, began like any other Sunday at the Brentwood estate. The sun rose over manicured lawns, the distant hum of the city was barely audible, and the Reiner household was cloaked in an illusion of calm. Yet beneath this serene surface, invisible tensions were simmering, and a storm was silently approaching, a storm that would erupt in violence, forever altering the lives of the family and everyone connected to them. That morning would mark the beginning of a day that few could have anticipated, a day where the ordinary turned horrifying, and a family's private world shattered in an instant. In high-profile households, Sundays often carry a rhythm of leisure, family time, and quiet routines. For Rob and Michelle, this day may have begun with breakfast, conversations about plans, and the familiar patterns that punctuated their life together. Yet in the guest house, Nick Reiner's day unfolded differently. Reports suggest he may have been isolated, navigating his own thoughts, frustrations, and possibly emotional turmoil. Observers familiar with the family note that Nick had periods of intense introspection and emotional fluctuation, which, in retrospect, may have contributed to the volatile sequence of events that would unfold later in the day. The initial hours of December 14th were likely uneventful to any casual observer, yet within the walls of the estate, subtle signs of tension were emerging. Small disagreements, lingering resentments, or simply the undercurrent of unspoken conflict may have set the stage for disaster. In many domestic tragedies, ordinary conflicts act as catalysts, tipping points that transform simmering frustration into sudden, catastrophic action. While we may never know the precise moment when that tipping point was reached, the combination of proximity, history, and unresolved tension created a volatile environment. Neighbors and friends reported hearing little from the estate that morning, suggesting that the events began and escalated largely behind closed doors. This silence is characteristic of family tragedies in affluent households, where appearances are meticulously maintained and public exposure is minimized. Yet the quiet masks the reality of internal conflict, where emotions, grievances, and frustrations build until they can no longer be contained. In the case of the Reiners, that containment would fail catastrophically, leaving irreversible consequences in its wake. Details surrounding the confrontation that led to the murders are, understandably, sparse. Law enforcement reports indicate that both Rob and Michelle suffered multiple sharp force injuries, and their deaths were officially ruled homicides. The nature of the injuries suggests a violent and deliberate act, one that unfolded with intensity and precision. While the precise sequence of actions remains under investigation, forensic evidence points to a confrontation that escalated quickly, resulting in the deaths of the parents. Romy's role that day is central and haunting. She reportedly discovered the bodies, entering the house to find her parents fatally wounded. Her immediate response, contacting authorities and highlighting the potential involvement of a family member, demonstrates both presence of mind and an acute awareness of the household's internal dynamics. Her warning would prove critical, guiding law enforcement to consider the possibility that the perpetrator was known to the victims. Romy's observations highlight the complexity of the family situation and raise questions about prior warning signs, emotional tension, and potential intervention that could have prevented the tragedy. The response by law enforcement was swift. Police arrived at the Brentwood estate, securing the scene, documenting evidence, and beginning the painstaking work of reconstructing the sequence of events. The presence of officers, forensic teams, and investigators underscores the severity of the situation and the urgency with which authorities approach the case. In high-profile situations, especially those involving families in the public eye, the need for meticulous investigation is heightened, as every detail, from the placement of objects to the nature of injuries, becomes crucial in understanding the events that transpired. Media outlets, of course, descended quickly upon the story, though initial reporting was careful, given the ongoing investigation. Early reports highlighted the deaths of Rob and Michelle, the involvement of Nick as a suspect, and the shocking discovery by Romy. Social media buzzed with speculation, questions, and reactions from fans, colleagues, and observers worldwide. The intersection of celebrity status and true crime magnified public interest, creating a narrative that was as compelling as it was tragic. The timing of the events raises further questions. How long did the confrontation last? Were there opportunities for de-escalation? Could intervention, had it arrived sooner, have changed the outcome? These questions, central to both criminal investigation and human understanding, remain at the heart of the tragedy. Each possibility, each what if, adds to the emotional weight of the story and highlights the fragility of family safety, even in the most seemingly secure environments. Nick's interactions with his parents on that day, while largely private, are critical to understanding the dynamics that led to the violence. Whether the result of a planned act or an impulsive outburst, the fact remains that the confrontation ended in fatality. Law enforcement, forensic experts, and psychologists alike would later analyze these dynamics, considering everything from behavioral patterns to familial relationships and psychological triggers. In such cases, the convergence of environmental, emotional, and interpersonal factors often illuminates the pathway to tragedy, even if definitive motives remain elusive. In the hours following the murders, the family's world was irrevocably changed. Romy, traumatized by the discovery and acutely aware of her brother's potential involvement, had to navigate the shock while interacting with law enforcement. Friends and extended family began to receive fragmented information, prompting emotional responses ranging from disbelief to horror. The weight of the tragedy was compounded by the high-profile nature of the family, as public curiosity collided with private grief. As the day progressed into evening, police took custody of Nick Reiner, formally charging him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The speed and decisiveness of the legal response reflected both the severity of the crime and the available evidence. Within hours, the narrative had shifted from a domestic tragedy to a criminal investigation with global attention. The combination of family dynamics, celebrity status, and violent death created a story that captivated the public while devastating those directly involved. For observers, the events of December 14th offer a stark reminder that domestic tragedy can strike even in the most seemingly secure environments. The Reiner estate, with its gates, surveillance, and private spaces, was no shield against the consequences of unresolved tension, emotional volatility, and interpersonal conflict. In households like these, wealth and status may amplify the impact of conflict rather than mitigate it, creating conditions in which a single spark can ignite a devastating chain reaction. The public fascination with this day is understandable, but it also obscures a deeper truth. The tragedy of December 14th is fundamentally human. It involves fear, anger, grief, and the consequences of choices made under pressure. It challenges assumptions about privilege, family cohesion, and safety. And it raises profound questions about the nature of trust, the limits of intervention, and the fragile boundaries between love and violence. As night fell on December 14th, the Brentwood estate was forever transformed. The Reiner family, once perceived as a bastion of stability and public composure, was now a site of grief, investigation, and global scrutiny. The deaths of Rob and Michelle, the arrest of Nick, and the warnings provided by Romy marked the beginning of a story that would continue to unravel, revealing hidden dynamics, psychological complexity, and the unthinkable events that would follow. The evening of December 14th, 2025, marked a turning point in the Reiner family tragedy. What had begun as a day of ordinary Sunday routines escalated into a scene of unspeakable horror, leaving law enforcement with a singular focus. The arrest of Nick Reiner, the son whose presence at the estate and potential involvement in the deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner demanded immediate attention. The arrest would set in motion a chain of events that would dominate headlines, provoke public speculation, and ultimately lead to outcomes more shocking than anyone could have imagined. By the time police arrived at the Brentwood estate, the scene was both chaotic and somber. Romy, the daughter who discovered her parents' bodies, had already contacted authorities and provided a chilling warning. A dangerous family member should be considered a suspect. That warning would prove pivotal. Law enforcement, faced with a high-profile crime involving 2 prominent figures, moved with precision, balancing urgency with meticulous adherence to investigative protocol. The first step, locating Nick, who resided in the estate's guest house. Nick's arrest was not simply a procedural formality. It was a moment fraught with tension, emotional intensity, and public scrutiny. Officers approached the guest house with caution, fully aware of the potential volatility of the situation. Inside, Nick was confronted with law enforcement for the first time since the tragedy. Reports indicate that he did not resist arrest violently, though the atmosphere was undoubtedly charged with emotion, fear, and uncertainty. For Nick, a life that had once been defined by privilege and relative isolation was now being violently redirected into the criminal justice system. The nature of the charges was severe, 2 counts of first-degree murder. In legal terms, this classification carries the implication of premeditation, deliberate action, and the gravest possible consideration under criminal law. Publicly, the announcement of these charges amplified the shock, turning a private family tragedy into a global spectacle. Media outlets immediately covered the arrest, focusing on both the procedural aspects and the narrative implications. The son of Rob and Michelle Reiner, a man who had largely lived outside public view, was now the central figure in one of the most sensational domestic homicide cases of the year. Understanding the arrest requires context about Nick's life and the dynamics that may have led to this confrontation. As previously explored, Nick had lived in the guest house, a space both connected to and separated from the main household. This physical separation mirrored emotional and psychological distance. He was part of the family, yet somewhat removed, included yet isolated. Law enforcement, aware of this context, considered both his proximity to the victims and the warnings provided by Romy in approaching the arrest. Witnesses and neighbors would later describe the arrest as swift but measured. Officers carefully documented every interaction, aware that the high-profile nature of the case meant that even minor procedural errors could have significant consequences. The arrest was captured both through official records and media observation, though footage and detailed public accounts remain limited. What is clear, however, is that this moment marked the beginning of a legal and personal journey that would be as complex as it was tragic. The psychological weight of the arrest cannot be overstated. For Nick, this was the first official acknowledgement of his alleged involvement in the deaths of his parents. The transition from household member to criminal suspect is a profound one, impacting not only legal standing but also identity, emotional stability, and perception by others. Law enforcement officers, while focused on procedure, also had to manage the emotional volatility inherent in confronting someone accused of such grave acts, particularly within a household already traumatized by loss. From a legal perspective, the arrest was accompanied by a series of formalities. Reading of rights, processing of personal information, and initiation of investigative procedures. Nick was transported to a secure facility where he would await formal charges, interviews, and legal counsel. Each step of this process was designed to ensure that the investigation remained thorough, evidence was preserved, and due process was followed, even in the midst of intense public scrutiny and emotional pressure. Public reaction to the arrest was immediate and intense. Social media platforms erupted with speculation, theories, and emotional responses ranging from shock to anger to disbelief. Commentators debated motives, the likelihood of premeditation, and the implications for the family's legacy. For many, the arrest confirmed the worst fears. The tragedy had been perpetrated from within by someone intimately connected to the victims. This realization added a layer of horror to an already devastating story, emphasizing the unpredictability of human behavior and the fragility of family safety. Experts in criminal psychology have noted that arrests in domestic homicide cases often represent both an investigative milestone and a point of emotional escalation. For families, the transition from grief to legal proceedings can be disorienting, emotionally taxing, and fraught with conflict. In the Reiner case, Romy's dual role as both witness and surviving family member added complexity, as she navigated her own grief while cooperating with law enforcement and facing public attention. The arrest also prompted reflection on preventive opportunities. Could warning signs have been recognized earlier? Were there moments when intervention might have prevented escalation? These questions, while difficult to answer definitively, are central to understanding the dynamics of domestic homicide and the tragic convergence of psychological, familial, and environmental factors that lead to such outcomes. Within hours of his arrest, Nick was placed in a secure facility. Here, the stark realities of his situation began to unfold. No longer insulated by wealth or family privilege, he was now subject to the rigorous procedures, rules, and vulnerabilities of the criminal justice system. Little could have prepared him, or anyone, for what lay ahead, including the shocking events that would soon culminate in his own death. The arrest also marked a turning point in public perception. The story was no longer about tragedy alone. It had transformed into a criminal case, with the son as accused perpetrator and the parents as victims. This shift introduced new dynamics, speculation about motive, the nature of the crime, and the interplay between family history and alleged criminal action dominated discussions. It also intensified emotional responses, both within the family and in the public sphere, as the narrative of betrayal, violence, and human fragility took center stage. Yet even at this stage, questions remained unanswered. How did events escalate to the fatal confrontation? What internal and external pressures contributed to Nick's actions? Could intervention have altered the outcome? and what would happen next in a story that had already shocked a nation and captured global attention. The arrest of Nick Reiner set the stage for the next chapter of this tragedy. A journey through legal proceedings, prison realities, and the ultimately devastating conclusion of his life. The complexity of the family, the psychological landscape, and the high-stakes environment of incarceration would all play a role in shaping events yet to come. With the arrest of Nick Reiner complete, the focus of law enforcement and the public alike shifted to the painstaking work of investigation. In cases of domestic homicide, especially those involving high-profile families, every detail matters: the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. For investigators, reconstructing the events of December 14, 2025, meant untangling a web of personal relationships, behavioral patterns, and forensic evidence, all while navigating the intense scrutiny of the media and the public. The investigation began immediately at the Brentwood estate. Officers, forensic teams, and detectives meticulously examined the main house, the guest house, and the surrounding property. Every room, hallway, and doorway became a potential source of evidence. Law enforcement noted the lack of forced entry, which immediately pointed towards someone familiar with the household, someone who had access and knowledge of the home's layout. This detail alone was chilling, confirming suspicions that the perpetrator was not an outsider but a member of the family, a thought that added layers of horror to an already devastating scene. Autopsies and forensic analyses were central to understanding what happened that day. Rob and Michelle Reiner's deaths were officially classified as homicides resulting from multiple sharp force injuries. Each injury was examined for its angle, depth, and timing, providing investigators with crucial insights into the nature of the attack. Forensic specialists also considered the sequence of wounds, the potential weapons used, and the likely order of events leading to the fatal outcome. While these details may seem clinical, they are essential for reconstructing the moments of violence and understanding how the confrontation escalated to murder. Interviews were a critical part of the investigative process. Romy, as the family member who discovered the bodies, provided testimony that would become foundational to the case. Her statements about a dangerous family member who should be considered a suspect guided investigators' early focus. Investigators also interviewed neighbors, friends, and anyone who had interacted with Nick or the family in the days leading up to the crime. These conversations offered glimpses into potential warning signs, behavioral patterns, and the emotional climate within the household. Every anecdote, observation, or reported incident became a piece of the puzzle, helping investigators build a timeline and understand the dynamics that may have led to the tragedy. The timeline itself was painstakingly reconstructed. Investigators sought to pinpoint when the violence occurred, how long it lasted, and the movements of all individuals involved. Surveillance footage from nearby streets, phone records, and other digital evidence were analyzed to corroborate witness accounts and establish a sequence of events. The goal was not only to identify the perpetrator, but to understand the context and mechanics of the crime, the triggers, escalation, and choices that transformed a Sunday morning into a fatal confrontation. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement also considered Nick's background and behavioral history. Reports of previous emotional instability, interpersonal conflict, and potential mental health challenges were weighed against the evidence collected at the scene. Psychologists and criminal behavior specialists often participate in such investigations to provide insights into possible motives, triggers, and risk factors. In Nick's case, these analyses were particularly relevant given his proximity to the victims and the nature of the crime. Media coverage of the investigation added a layer of complexity. Every official statement, press release, and court filing was dissected by journalists and analysts. Social media amplified speculation, with fans, commentators, and armchair detectives theorizing about motive, family dynamics, and the potential consequences for the Reiner's legacy. The public fascination was understandable, but it also placed additional pressure on law enforcement to conduct a thorough and meticulous investigation without being swayed by speculation or external narratives. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation was understanding the motive. While the charges of first-degree murder implied premeditation, law enforcement and investigators sought to uncover whether the act was impulsive, deliberate, or the result of long-standing tension. Motive in domestic homicide cases is often multifaceted, involving a combination of psychological, relational, and situational factors. In high-profile households, these dynamics are further complicated by public perception, privilege, and access to resources that may obscure early warning signs. Evidence collection extended beyond the immediate crime scene. Forensic teams examined Nick's living quarters, personal belongings, digital devices, and communications. Investigators sought to identify any indicators of planning, premeditation, or emotional state leading up to the crime. Even seemingly minor details, a text message, a social media post, or a change in routine, could provide insight into the mindset and motivations behind the tragic events. Each piece of evidence was carefully documented, photographed, and analyzed to build a comprehensive understanding of the case. Investigators also faced the delicate task of balancing objectivity with the emotional realities of the family. Romy, as both a witness and a grieving daughter, had to navigate interactions with law enforcement while coping with trauma. Extended family members were interviewed, and friends were asked to provide insight into family dynamics and Nick's behavior. These conversations required sensitivity, as investigators sought factual information without causing additional harm or distress. Legal advisors and prosecutors were involved from an early stage, ensuring that the investigation adhered to procedural standards and that evidence would be admissible in court. In cases involving high-profile defendants, the stakes are higher, and any misstep